So today we'll be using Next.js and the app router to create a project portfolio page for showcasing your work. The goal is to build a page that looks something like this, that displays a grid of images based on the content we've provided. Each image has the project title, each image has a kind of hover effect, and clicking on the image takes you to the details page, which shows relevant data with what we see. We could have the date, the project description, maybe a link for more information, and here we can navigate back to the main page. So how do we get this built? Well, first we'll install the latest version of Next.js with TypeScript. Then we'll set up content management within the project using a tool called ContentLayer. In my case, I'll import the content from a Notion database, but you can also manage it directly as Markdown in the codebase if you prefer directly. Finally, we'll use the content to display the portfolio pages on the website. To create the index page, we'll just use a grid layout for showcasing all the portfolio items. As you can see, we'll be using Tailwind CSS, and then we'll create the layout for each individual project page. This basically means we'll be coding two pages in Next.js, one for displaying the index, the portfolio index, and one for showcasing a specific project. First, let's set up the project. So here what we want to do is open terminal, and we'll type npx create next app at latest. The first thing to do is to give it a name. I'm just going to call it portfolio website. The next question is all about what else we want to install, and we're going to accept the default answers to all of them, since we want to have TypeScript and ESLint and Tailwind, and we want to use the source directory and the app router. And we don't need to change the default import alias. So the first thing to do is to step into the directory we set up. So cd portfolio website. Okay. So before we go any further, I'll just close the example that I set up. And so now we need to install ContentLayer. And for that, we're just going to do npm install ContentLayer and then next-content-layer --force. And now we're going to use the --force here because ContentLayer only has dependencies up to Next 13, and as we've installed the latest version of Next.js, we're now at 14, so it doesn't detect that it's able to work with Next 14. Thing is, Next 14 doesn't introduce any new dependencies, so we're actually fine to go. Now let's open the Visual Studio on this project. Now the first thing we're going to do here, we're going to go into the package.json. And the thing is to be able to have the content layer that doesn't complain every time that we have the dependencies that are wrong. We're going to override the dependencies here. So we're going to add overrides, and we're going to add next content layer, and we're going to specify that for next we want to use the version that's inside the project, so $next. And this will say that next content layer, it is dependent on the version of next that's in the project. So that's going to be this version here, which is 14 at the moment. The next step is to install the npm module that I created that allows us to pass Notion content. So here what we do is we add npm install and at codeapps /notion-parse, and we're also going to include .env, and all this are the dev dependencies, so -d, and then let's install all that. Okay, so the next thing is to set up the content. There are basically two parts to this: setting up ContentLayer and its schema, and setting up the database in Notion. If you're interested in how this goes, I've explained previously why I use Markdown to store my content and why I use ContentLayer to validate the front matter, and how I use Notion to store the data and to have the schema which follows the schema in ContentLayer. So if you're interested, you can go and see the videos that I've put up here. If you haven't seen the videos, that's fine. There are several things you need to know before going forwards. The first thing to know is that we'll be storing our content in the src content directory. So let's just create here this folder just to be sure. So here, content. And within that content, for the portfolio content, we'll be storing in the subdirectory called portfolio. The second thing you need to know is that Markdown can store structured data at the top of the data in a format called front matter. So if we look at here, the content that I was showing earlier, the content is structured as a YAML file and between 3 dashes at the top. So this is an example of some of the content we'll be importing. The third thing to know is that ContentLayer parses these files and checks that the schema fits what is required and gives us the means then later to access the content in our code. Now, in terms of schema, what do we need for our portfolio items? So in our case here, the required fields are going to be the title, which is a string, the slug, which is also a string, the date, which is a date, and the main image, which has kind of a more complicated structure. We'll go into that later. The non-required fields that we're going to have are the Notion ID field, which I've used to track the correspondence between what's on Notion and in my content. So you don't only need that if you want to track your content in Notion. And that will also be a string, and then there's a tags field, which is also a list of strings. Like I said, the image is slightly more complex because we want to store the path of the image, but also the width and the height. So for this, we're going to use something called a nested type, where the field actually contains an object. I'll show you how that works in a second. First, we're going to set up the schema. For that, we need to set up a contentlayer.config.test file at the root of our project. So let's do that now. So contentlayer.config.ts. The first thing we need to do here is to import everything we need. So we're going to import from ContentLayer source files, and here we're going to import define document type, which defines the main document, define nested type, and make source. There we go. Now we're going to start by defining the image field. Like I said, it has the src field, which is the link to, or the path to the image, and the width and the height, which are numbers. So we're going to use the define nested type. So we have const image equals define nested type. And so as you can see, it's a function that returns an object. So if we finish up the object here, the first thing to do is to give it a name. So the name is image, not equals, colon. And then we define the fields. So here the fields, the src field is actually of type string, and it's required. And the width is type number and is required, and the height is of type number and is required. So that defines our image type. Now we're going to define the portfolio type, which uses the image nested type that we just defined. And the other interesting field to look at is the tags, which, as I mentioned, is a list of strings. The other fields are all self-explanatory. They simply state what their type is. So if we have export const, I'm not sure I need the export. Anyway, portfolio, define document type. So the first thing to do is to say what name it is, and name is portfolio, and then we're going to define the file path pattern, which is what folder the content can be found in. So if we have file pattern, and we actually don't need to specify it's in the content because that's the main folder that has all our content, and then we're in subfolders. So it adds the file path pattern to the main folder that we're going to define slightly further down. So now the fields. So the first thing is, no, we don't need as const, is the title, which is a string, not the description. The date, which is of type date, the slug, which is of type string, the notion ID, which is type string but is not required. I mean, you can put it required if you want, but for those of you who won't be using Notion, then you don't need this field, so I've had it as non-required. The tags is of type list, and it's a list of type string, and the list isn't required. And finally, what we need is the image type. So the image, and this is of type nested. And it's a nested of image, and it actually is required. So that sets up our content for the portfolio. So we have the title, the date, the slug, the Notion ID, the tags, and the image. Like I said, the tags are a list of content, of tags, of strings, sorry, and the image is a nested type which refers back to the image that we've defined here. The final thing to do is to tell ContentLayer where to find our content and what the types are that we're going to be, the document types really that we're going to be using. So for that we do export default make source, and here we're going to define the directory, so content path, and we're actually going to put in src/content, and we're going to specify the document type as portfolio, and then we're good to go. Now we need to head over to the next config.js file, and here we're going to import the a wrapper function from ContentLayer. So const equals, and so we're going to get this from require from next ContentLayer, and we're going to require the with ContentLayer, and we're going to wrap the configuration file, or the configuration object rather, with the with ContentLayer here. This is going to add the ContentLayer configuration to the configuration file for Next.js. So now let's just run this to make sure it all works. npm run dev. We can see it's loaded, and it says that there's stuff that we need to do to add to the TS configuration file. What we need to do is to go over to, like I said, the TS configuration file, and we need to set the base URL. And so here, if we set base URL, and this is actually just the base file. And the other thing we need to do is to, inside the parse, here we have the alias for the src file. Here we want to actually add content layer /generated, and this goes to it goes into the .content-layer /generated folder. When it gets generated, you can see here it generates a folder called .content-layer that actually gets referred to here in the content-layer /generated. As I've explained previously, I've created an npm package that fetches the content directly from Notion and saves it as a markdown file with front matter. That npm module is called @codeapps/notion-parse, and I have it here. I've also shared the Notion template where I store my content, or at least my portfolio content if you want to steal it. Once you've set up the Notion integration, well, as I've explained in the video, and you've got the Notion token and the Notion database ID, my script looks something like this. So we're just going to go and copy paste this and stick it into our project. So I'm create a folder called scripts, and here we have a file called, let's call it notion.js. And here we have, so in the example, I fetched the portfolio, and I also fetched the posts for the blog posts. We don't actually need that. And what we're going to also do is just check that if there is no secrets being correctly configured, we can do a console error no notion secret environment variable set. And so if we run this as a Node.js, it says no notion set. And if I check, I think I might have called my secret token instead of secret. So it's, I'm not going to open up the file to check because it's a secret. Run, and if we start debugging, we're good to go. And here, because I've said it here. If we start debugging, now you can see the different errors that are possible. So I've used notion token as the environment variable, and I pass it into the function that passes, and that's fetched all the content, including the images. And so if we go over to the content directory, we can see we have the files here with the front matter, with the links to the images. And my script, well, my package actually also goes to the images file, and it stores the images that have been stored in the Notion database. So the next step is going to be to set up the pages. We'll start by creating a portfolio folder inside the app directory. So here, new folder, portfolio. And here we're just going to create a page.tsx file, page.tsx. And here we'll start by setting up just a default simple page. So export default async function page. We'll call it portfolio index. And this portfolio index is going to just return a section. And in this section, we'll just have h1 portfolio. And perhaps we can add a little bit of styling. So class name equals, let's say mx auto, and max width 3xl. And the h1, same, add a bit of styling. Class name equals, just have the text center, for example, and have make it slightly bigger with text XL, and do font bold, we say. And so that's going to be the title. So inside we can have another div, and where we're going to put the grid. And so class name equals, so just add a bit of padding, so P4. And then we're going to have a thing called grid, and grid calls 3. There we go. So let's just run that if it's not already running. And so npm run dev. If we go to the portfolio page, we now have a very exciting page with just a title in there. Perhaps we can add a bit of padding also to the portfolio, P3. There we go. It's become slightly unstuck. Now inside this component, we can fetch the portfolio items from what's been set up for ContentLayer. So what we're going to do first is to import this import, and we're going to import from ContentLayer generated. And so we can just import the all portfolios. And so here, all we need to do is to map over all the portfolios. So we're just going to return for the moment a simple span with the portfolio . Getting there. we're just going to add in, so we're just going to return a simple span, and we're going to add in the index here. And so we have key equals and index. So now that we've created our grid on our index page, let's give it a run to see what it looks like. So here we just do npm run dev, and here we can see that Markdown is actually parsing the different files. It's complaining because I have fields that are additional on the Notion database, like the location and if it's enabled or not. And if we open up our portfolio page, we can see that we have the grid. For the moment, there's not much in there because there's just the titles. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a card, a component card, that is going to allow us to show all this content. So to do that, we're going to go into the src folder, and we're going to create a folder called components. And in this components file, I'm going to create a file called portfolio card.tsx. And here the nice thing is that we can from ContentLayer. The content layer actually generates types for us. So here in the import, I can actually import portfolio. I'm going to use it as the type for the props that I'm going to pass in. So interface portfolio card props, and here we're going to use item, and we're going to use portfolio. Portfolio. Sorry, it has a semicolon here. There we go. Now let's start creating our portfolio card. And so we can just do an export const portfolio card. And it's going to be a React functional component. And it's going to take in the, and here it's not happy because we're not returning anything yet. So we're going to return a div for starters. And this div, no, I don't, well, I guess, yeah, is going to have a full width. So class name equals width full. And we don't need the excerpt. And we're just going to have image, and the src is going to be item.image.src. The alt is going to be item.title, because we have the title for the item in our sorry, I've started typing. I need to import image from Next.js first. So now I've imported image from Next.js, and here I have the alt. I also have the width, which is going to be item.image.width, and the height, which is going to be item.image.height. These are actually required by the image component, and I've actually the way my integration works with Notion, it actually brings it into the it reads the file and it detects its width and its height as it imports it. Now that we have that, what we can do is go back to our page here, and instead of returning a simple span, we can return a portfolio card with the key equals index, and the item is portfolio. And for some reason it's not happy here. Oh, I've forgotten something. Yes, there's a bracket that's too much. No, there we go. Okay, now we have this here. To actually have it as kind of a saner disposition, we're going to go back to the card. the portfolio card, and here we're going to use on this on the image have a class name, and we're going to add a class from Tailwind called aspect square, and we're going to say it has an object cover. And while we're at it, well, let's see what this does. Okay, so that's starting to look like something. Perhaps let's now go onto the page that creates, where we show the details for each content. Maybe what we can do first, before I go there, is to go back to the page here, and here for our grid, just add a little, I don't know, gap 1 or something. So there's a slightly more spacing, maybe gap 3. There we go. It's starting to look like something, at least. So now we're going to go to the details page for each content. And here what we do is, in the portfolio directory, add a new directory. And this is going to be called, between square brackets, it's going to be called slug. And here we're going to create a new page called page.tsx. And in this page.tsx file, we can we're going to be using the stuff from ContentLayer generated. So from ContentLayer generated, and we're going to include the both the portfolio type, and we're going to fetch all the portfolios again. Const page, it's a React functional component, and it doesn't take this. No, it has the interface is the parameters interface, because it has used a dynamic parameter from the using the slug, and so the parameters is a slug. So it's actually the type here is the params type. And so here what we get is a params which has a slug. And here, before we go any further, we're going to do export default page. And here we're just going to return, just for beginners, h1 and slug. There we go. So if we head back here, if we type here blah blah blah, it just types that, it shows up the slug that we just entered. Now if we go back here, instead of using the slug, what we're going to do is fetch the item that we want. We're going to have const item equals, and we're going to get all portfolios, and we're going to find the item where the slug corresponds to the slug. And so here, instead of the slug, we use the title. Now if we reload here, there's nothing left. Now, do you have any idea why that might be? The reason for that is because basically the slug invented blah 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 doesn't have a corresponding portfolio item, obviously. So what we want to do is actually manage the case where the slug isn't found. Sorry. So here, if we go here, we go if we don't have the item. What we could do is return just not found, like this, and here in this case it shows not found. But what we actually want to do is return a 404 error. So here we call not found, which is from Next navigation, and so we import not found from Next navigation, and we call that. So if here we reload, we have the 404 error, which is what we want. Now, when we do have the item, it'll set up the what we want. To be able to actually navigate to the page correctly, perhaps what we can do is directly set up the link from the index page, because I can't remember exactly all the slugs. So let's go back to the index page, and what we'll do is set up a link on these cards to link to the page we just set up. So if we go here into the pages, the portfolio cards, here we're just going to add around the div, we're going to add a link that we're going to import from next link, and so that's going to wrap the whole component, and it's just going to have an href, and it's going to go to /portfolio, and here we can add the item.slug. Why is it not happy? Yes. There we go. So /portfolio/ and then we add the slug. So if we go back to our head here, to our index here, if we click on any of these, we find ourselves in the page that corresponds with the slug. So we have a bit of navigation there. So let's go back to our card, our details page. Here, what we can now start doing is setting up this page. So we can just set up a container div, and we're going to use the same width as what we had on the previous one. So let's do a mx auto and a max width. I can't remember which one I used. I think it was 4XL. And then so we have the title, and then here we're going to add in just simply the image from the component. So image. We need to also import it from Next, and I think that's correct. And then what we can do is add in the content from the content here. What we want is also to have class name equals and just have it full width. And then we're going to add in the markdown content. So we're just going to add it in div, and here we can have, it's actually going to be a self-closing div because we're going to dangerously set the inner HTML. So dangerously set inner HTML, and this takes an object with some HTML, and on the item we have the body, which I think is what we want. So if we no, it's item body.html. So here we have our content which is being set up. Maybe what we can do is pimp up the h1 a tiny little bit. So here class name equals, and in the same way add a bit of padding, at least vertical padding. So 4, make the text bold maybe, and let's change the size so it's 3XL, should we say? Yeah, something like that. So and here maybe on our div, what we can do for the moment is I'm just going to add a bit of vertical padding as well. Okay, and what we want now is just to have a little link that goes back to the main portfolio item. So if we go link from next link and go to portfolio and go back to portfolio, and what we can do is just make this I don't know what color, or text blue. Does this work? Am I just making things up? Text blue 500. Back to portfolio. So if we click here, we go back, and if we click here, we go here to the thing. So it's a bit big. Back to portfolio. There we go. So here we have the basic layout. We fetched the content from Markdown. We've set it up on the different pages. I've shared the link in the description for the final project where I've added in the zoom on the hover on the cards. I hope this was helpful. Like I said, I've provided the full link to the full article in the description. I've provided the link to the repository. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see, and in the meantime, I'll see you in the next video.